Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Now, yes, I am broadcasting from Keene, New Hampshire. And yes, there was something that is being called a riot. Other people have said that it was more along the lines of hooliganism. And I could probably fill 2 hours talking about it, but instead of talking about the riots, I want to talk about the director of the director of Pumpkin Fest trying to shut down a reporter from Cheshire TV, which is the local community access television station that I happen to be on the board of directors of. So when I heard about this, I got very intrigued, and then I saw a video that was posted by Ben Swan and has since been uploaded on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/FPP. I think it might be fpp.cc, but just Google Cheshire TV reporter. I'm also going to be posting the link on Twitter. And it's about 1.5 minutes long video. And the video begins with the director of Pumpkin Fest, Ruth Sterling, standing between the cameraman and the reporter, Jared Goodell. And Jared Goodell is trying to do an interview with Ruth Sterling, or maybe she comes in to interrupt what he was talking about because he was telling people about the riots that were happening near the college about 1.5 blocks away from the Pumpkin Fest. So that's where we pick up with the video.
Right now, Ruth Sterling, who is the festival coordinator, is on site here and is being, well, she's not letting me do my job and to report to you. She would not like me to tell you what is going on at Keene State College.
So she reaches for the microphone when he says she doesn't want me to tell you what's going on at Keene State College, and he takes a step back from her.
Now I'm being called a free stater.
And she asks, are you a free stater?
The footprint of Keene Pumpkin Festival is 100% safe. We have a bigger crowd than we've ever had. I want them to have a wonderful evening and not be disturbed by people who aren't even at the Pumpkin Festival. So if you think that inciting these people is a good idea, I am going to pull the plug on you.
So she says, if you think that inciting these people is a good idea, I'm going to pull the plug. And I don't see how reporting that something is happening is the same as inciting people to do the violence that is happening. But apparently Ruth Sterling disagrees.
You are here as a guest of Keene Pumpkin Festival, and I assigned you this spot.
You heard it here first, everybody.
Not alarm our guests. Thank you.
When you report the news, when you report the reality, the people in charge want to shut you down.
And so now she's trying to block the camera. She's trying to block the camera again. And so he takes a couple of steps to the side, and the cameraman pans over to where she's no longer blocking. And listen closely to what he says here. Let me back up just a couple of seconds. And this is to where she is now standing directly in front of him.
Shut you down. This is against freedom of the press, folks. We have been bringing you coverage all day. Yes, Ruth is correct that this festival is very important for Keene. We have been reporting that all day long. Then pull the plug. But pull the plug.
Profit agency, and you have no right to self-promote here, darling.
I'm not self-promoting anything.
Yes, you are. Do we agree he's self-promoting? I agree.
And so she asked,
everybody.
She asked, do we agree that he's self-promoting? And nobody said anything. So then she said, well, I agree. Pats him on the back in a very patronizing sort of manner, and then walks away.
Ruth Sterling, the festival organizer of the Keene Pumpkin Festival, censoring local media from the truth of what is happening outside the footprint. More on this to come in just minutes. But right now, we want to bring in Zach.
So that's where the interview or that segment ended, and he brought in some guy that does a syndicated radio show on like the top 40 stations in New England. I don't know how big that show is, but there you have it. And if you want to watch the video without my commentary, I have posted the link on the Facebooks and the Twitters, so you can find the video there. Now, let me talk about something that is not causing a riot, but should definitely get people up in arms, and that's the Federal Reserve. Now, I know, as a libertarian / voluntarist, I don't want there to be a Federal Reserve, and I probably don't talk about how I hate the Federal Reserve as much as some people would like me to. But Reuters actually came up with some very good information. I'm assuming they obtained this through some sort of Freedom of Information request, and the article came out on Friday. Apparently, there are 113 people working for the Federal Reserve that make an average of $246,506 per year, excluding bonuses and other benefits, which winds up being about $45,000 per year more than what the Federal Reserve chairman makes, and nearly double the normal top government salary. The article here from Reuters, and I will post the link, says Janet Yellen, whose salary is set by Congress, earns $201,700 per year. The details on Fed pay were provided to Reuters in response to a Freedom of Information Act request for data on all employees of the central bank whose salaries outstrip $130,810 per year, which is the top of the government's pay scale in most areas. However, the central bank only provided salaries for staff who make at least $225,000 per year, with some exceptions. It is the first time the list has been made public. There are some Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives and some Democrats, although the article here from Reuters does not mention the Democrats, but there are Democrats who have sponsored the bill to audit the Federal Reserve. Supporters of the Fed say the world's leading central bank needs top talent and notes that it's expensive, or rather that its expenses are not covered by taxpayers, but rather from the income it earns on securities it holds. Critics, however, think the Fed has too much discretion. Now, before I continue with the article, let me just touch on it's not paid for with tax money, it's paid for with interest on securities. Well, the Federal Reserve holds a lot of securities that were only taken out because the Treasury said, hey, we need you to print more money. So what happens is the Treasury goes to the Fed and says, we need you to print some money. Here's, some securities, or here's some bonds. Poof, just make it out of thin air. Here it is. We need you to print money to cover this. And so then that money is then lent to the federal government at interest, of course, and then, spent however the government wants it spent. What's been going on in the last several years is quantitative easing. I forget if it's 3, 4, 7, who really knows, but there's been some sort of quantitative easing going on to where the Fed prints a bunch of money and then they're using it to help people that are upside down on mortgages and buy out mortgages and do a bunch of other stuff with mortgages. But the money is still being created out of thin air and then put into circulation. And the U.S. government has to pay the Fed some interest on that. So to say that Fed expenses are not covered by tax dollars is maybe, it could possibly be the truth. However, it's one step from being the truth. But the article here continues. It says, Maggie Siddell, a spokeswoman for New Jersey Republican Scott Garrett, who's one of the co-sponsors of the bill, it certainly bolsters the case for more oversight. As of July 31st, the Fed's Inspector General led the list with an average salary of, or rather with an annual salary of $312,000, followed by the central bank's 4 division directors, its general counsel and chief operating officer, whose base salary is $265,000. More on this and more when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Now, if you want to make sure that you hear all of the episodes of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, and maybe you're not near a computer, maybe you can't listen live and you want to listen to the archives, you're not near a computer, and your phone doesn't necessarily have one of those RSS aggregator sort of things to where you can download the archives. Well, never fear. There's still a way you can do it. The iHeartRadio app. Peace, Love, Liberty Radio is one of like 4 or 5 Liberty programs that's on iHeartRadio that's available on the iHeartRadio app. And you can listen to anything on iHeartRadio as long as you have a data connection. You don't necessarily have to have, 3G, 4G, whatever. As long as you have some kind of data connection, you can listen to anything on iHeartRadio. The other Liberty programs that you can listen to on iHeartRadio are Free Talk Live, the Angel Clark Show, the daily 5-minute newscast that I've been doing for about 8.5 months now, FPP Radio News, and also Derek J's Peace News Now. And, of course, this show, Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. You can find this show very easily on iHeartRadio by going to iHeart.fppradio.com in your browser, and then that will take you directly to the listing for Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Again, that's iHeart.fppradio.com. So there's just a little bit more from the Reuters article about Fed employees making more money than the chairman of the Fed, or in this case, the chairwoman of the Federal Reserve. Despite the relatively high senior managers at the Fed board, the average salary of all of its staffers was $121,279, excluding benefits, a figure that lags behind other financial regulators. And then they have a link to a graphic to where you can compare, and they actually list some of the salaries. Over at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the average salary was $157,946 in fiscal year 2013, while at the FDIC, that's the Federal Department of Insurance, or rather the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the average salary was $130,000, and the average salary at the Commodities Futures Trading Commission was $146,323. So it seems as though the best way to make money is to be in the business of making money. The article continues. It says, former Senator Ted Kaufman said it was important for the central bank to hire and retain talented staff who could fetch more in the private sector. Managing directors at large investment banks, for example, usually earn a salary of around $250,000 plus bonuses that in good times can be double or triple the salary. Nonetheless, the Democrat from Delaware said that tracking the Fed's cost was a legitimate concern. Kaufman said, quote, in the private sector, every business has incentives to keep costs down. In government, you have to overcome that issue that there is no natural need to keep costs down. That's probably one of the most truthful things that I have ever seen a politician having said, because that's exactly what happens when you're negotiating with government, as these employees are doing, or a lot of times you will see unions that pretty much only represent government employees. And they're, out there saying, we need more money. We need more money. And if there was, a private business that they were picketing or protesting against, then the business owner or the manager of the business or whoever was in charge could say, hey, listen, here's our profit and loss statement. If we wind up giving you X, then that's going to drop profits down to Y. And we really can't survive at that level unless we wind up raising prices, and then, we'll wind up losing customers, blah, blah, blah. But with government, you don't really have that, because the unions just say, well, raise taxes to offset it. Raise taxes to offset it. And as the former Senator Kaufman said here, quote, in government, you have to overcome the issue that there is no natural need to keep costs down. And that's the truth. When you're dealing with government, there is no natural need to keep costs down. Because if you've ever paid attention to the way local government winds up operating, they just say, oh, well, it's only going up by 0.5%, and we have to raise the budget because we're not getting as much tax money from fill-in-the-blank entity. Here in Keene at the school board, they're saying we're not getting as much money from the state and the federal government because we have fewer students. So we have to raise how much we pay our teachers. And that makes absolutely no sense, because if you have fewer students, then you would think it would cost you less money to run the school. But no, they say they need to spend more money because they have fewer students. And it makes no sense because there is not that natural need to keep down cost. Now, moving on from the Fed to something else where there's not really a natural need to keep down cost, but maybe kind of the Ukraine situation with Russia, to where Ukraine has been trying to wind up getting gas from Russia, and Russia's saying, well, they're not paying for the gas, so we're just going to shut it off. Well, apparently it seems as though there was some kind of agreement recently for the natural gas supplies for Ukraine before winter. The article here is from Reuters, and it says Ukraine's and Russia's leaders have reached a preliminary agreement on a price for gas supplies this winter, but Kiev may need international help to pay. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko said on Saturday. Poroshenko met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Milan on Friday, that's Milan, Italy, to discuss the conflict in Ukraine's eastern region, where supposedly Russian separatists, I don't know if they are Russian, I don't know if they're not Russian, but the claim here from Reuters is that the Russian separatists are fighting with the Kiev government forces. And, of course, if you read other claims, they would say that the Ukrainian military is instigating the separatists, but nonetheless, Poroshenko is, he's saying, well, there's all this stuff going on in the east, and Russia, you're behind it, so you need to give us gas. And the article continues. It says, Poroshenko said in an interview, we reached an agreement until March 31st. We will fix the price at $385. Notice they didn't say we will pay market price, or the market price that was set by Gazprom is $385. No. They actually came out and said, we fixed the price at $385. An agreement signed in 2009 by former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko called on Ukraine to pay $485 per 1,000 cubic meters for Russian gas. Kiev is contesting the contract in a Stockholm arbitration court. And, of course, it doesn't matter what the price is because the Ukrainian government's not going to pay it because they don't have money to pay, and they're already like $1 billion in debt on previous gas shipments. There's more when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So I've got an interesting article here from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It's a very good privacy rights group who works primarily with sort of copyright-related things and digital privacy. And they've got a very interesting article here titled, A Trademark is Not a Censorship Tool. And the article reads, any organization that takes a stand on controversial issues can expect some criticism. And this criticism might involve someone commenting on the organization's trademark name or logo. For example, opponents of the NRA have suggested that NRA stands for Next Rifle Assault. critics of the ACLU have mocked it as the anti-Christian lawyers union. I've also seen aging commie leftover unit. The former CEO of the RIAA was fond of deriding EFF as Everything for Free Foundation. Whether you think these parodies are brilliant or lame, there should be no question that they are fully protected by the First Amendment. Unfortunately, a recent federal court decision from Virginia would allow trademarks to trump speech. In that case, Radiance Foundation v. NAACP, the fight was over a blog post that criticized the NAACP. The Radiance Foundation is a conservative nonprofit that advocates for what it perceives to be appropriate family values. In a blog post titled NAACP, National Association for the Abortion of Colored People, Radiance claimed that the NAACP embraces all things liberal, most things socialist, and nothing pro-life. The NAACP responded with a letter to Radiance threatening a lawsuit if it did not cease using the NAACP's trademark. Radiance called on the courts for protection, asking for a declaration the blog post was protected speech. That sentence doesn't really make sense there. After a bench trial, Judge Raymond Jackson ruled ruled against Radiance, finding that the post infringed on the NAACP's trademark and giving little credence to Radiance's First Amendment claim. Something else that is not mentioned is the fair use within the copyright law and the trademark law. And fair use allows for things that are obviously satire or parody. And I think that anyone with at least 2 brain cells that were fully functional would realize that saying NRA is next rifle assault, ACLU is anti-Christian lawyer union, or EFF is everything for free foundation, or even that NAACP stands for National Association for the Abortion of Colored People. Anybody that has a functioning brain could tell that that is parody. But apparently there are people that don't think that there's any place in free speech for parody. And instead of just putting out a letter saying, like, this guy made fun of us, he's a big meanie head, they decided to go to the courts and tell the judge, this guy made fun of us, he's a big meanie head, now do something bad to him. And unfortunately, the judge decided that the people behind Radiance or behind the Radiance Foundation, they're big meanie heads and something needs to be done with them. The article here from EFF continues. It says, whatever one's view on the parties involved, this ruling must not stand. As one wise judge observed, trademark law regulates only economic, not ideological or political competition. Competition in the marketplace of ideas is precisely what the First Amendment is designed to protect. In context, it is absolutely clear that the blog post involved the latter kind of competition. Its fierce criticism obviously was not endorsed by the NAACP, and no one bought a product or service based on any confusion. You might think Radiance's blog post was trite and misguided, but that doesn't make it trademark infringement. Indeed, on the court's reasoning, many folks who have used a corporation's name or logo when criticizing its conduct, consider examples, and then they link to 4 different things, and it's hard to tell based on the URL exactly what they are, but they say consider the conduct here, 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 and here could be held liable for trademark infringement. The EFF, together with the ACLU of Virginia, filed an amicus brief in the appeal of the ruling. We are supporting Radiance's appeal not because we agree with his message, but because a decision holding it liable for trademark infringement threatens a huge range of expression. Our brief explains that Judge Jackson's decision misreads both trademark law and the First Amendment. There are many cases holding that use of a trademark in speech, commenting on, or criticizing the trademark owner is not infringement. However, the First Amendment provides an independent reason for dismissing this trademark claim. We hope the Fourth Circuit agrees and protects the right to mention or mock a trademark, just as it protects the right to mock a trademark owner. Our brief in this case was prepared by the First Amendment Amicus Brief Clinic at the UCLA School of Law. And then they thank the professor that was behind that. And while I was reading this, it made me remember a T-shirt that I forget who did it. I think it might have been Liberty Maniacs that put this shirt together and put it up on their Zazzle store, where they were making fun of the NSA, where it said, the NSA, the only government agency that listens. And they had a parody of the NSA logo, and there was some kind of kerfuffle about that. And that might actually be one of the things that is linked to here in the EFF article, where they link to 4 different things. But yeah, it's one of those things of, if there's no room for parody in, the copyright law, then you're really shutting down a bunch of things, because anybody can copyright pretty much anything. That's one of the bad parts about copyright law, is that it does allow pretty much anything to be copyrighted. I remember a few years ago, heck, it was probably 10 or 12 years ago now, where there was some new sports network that was coming up, and they wanted to call themselves the College Sports Programming Network. The initials would have been CSPN. And the Entertainment Sports Programming Network, which is one of 2 reasons that most people give for purchasing cable or satellite, ESPN, filed a lawsuit against CSPN, claiming that they were trying to improperly use the trademark and service mark of the entity ESPN to somehow infringe on their rights to broadcast football games, even though they weren't going to be broadcasting the same games at the same time. They weren't going to really do anything that ESPN was doing other than broadcast games. And if you're going to say that my right to broadcast a game because I have this contract is being infringed by this other company broadcasting a game, even though it's not the same game, but they're still doing the same thing, then CBS would probably be out of business as far as their sports goes. ABC would be out of business ABC owns ESPN. So they would be the only company that could broadcast sports, because they would then have the copyright and the service mark on broadcasting sports, and nobody else could do it. Now, obviously, that's like way down the road of if everything is taken to its logical conclusion of how BS copyright law is, but it's a slippery slope, and we have to leave room for parodies. Stay tuned to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio for more when we come back. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. You can find all of the listening options right there by clicking on, I believe it's listening options. Or you can type in listen.fppradio.com. It'll show you all of the various times and days and locations where you can listen to the show. And, of course, the show is live on Sundays from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern and originates from the LRN.FM studio. It's also simulcast on Freedom Phalanx Radio and Daily Paul Radio, which is going through some kind of transition to where I think it's now Grassroots Revolution Radio. I forget exactly what it is now, but it used to be Daily Paul Radio, and they've merged with somebody and then somebody else, and one of the mergers may have fallen through. I'm not really entirely sure, but All of the links are there on listen.fppradio.com. So you often hear government people say that, well, we just need to throw more money at it, and that'll make it better. Usually when they say that, they're referring to one of two things, either schools or war, right? Because, if we just spend more money blowing up people in the Middle East, then that'll make things better, right? Or if we just pay more to educate children, that'll make them smarter, right? Well, in this case, the New York City criminal justice system is continuing to throw money at a problem. And I hate the term criminal justice system because there's not really any justice in this system. It's more, punishing people that are alleged to be criminals, and then they were, some prosecutor was able to convince a judge that the person was a criminal, and then you find out years later that, 15% of people are wrongly convicted. And that's only for, the super serious things. Who knows how many of the low-level offenders are wrongfully convicted? How many low-level offenders wrongfully admit to be guilty because they don't want to take it to a trial because they hear the thing of, well, listen, kid, if you plead guilty now, then we'll only put you in there for 6 months. If you say not guilty and you go before the judge, well, the judge can decide to put you in for 10 years. Do you really want to take that bargain? And most people, they're going to, weigh the cost-benefit analysis. 60 days versus 10 years. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll say guilty. Even though they may not have done the thing that they were alleged to do, but because they might not be able to afford a lawyer or whatever else, they decide to take the plea. So there's a bunch of people that haven't committed the crime that they are in prison for or in jail for. In this case, the article comes from Reason.com and says New York City's criminal justice system continues to have severe problems. Rikers Island Prison, New York City's primary jail facility, has more staff and fewer inmates than in previous years, and yet it also has sky-high cost and increasing levels of violence, according to a forthcoming comptroller's report. The cost is higher than ever and way out of proportion with comparable urban areas. The city of New York spent $1.1 billion, that's billion with a B, to run its jail last year, according to the report, and that is a record amount of money. Housing a prisoner for a year in New York cost the city's correction department $100,000 last fiscal year. That's a huge increase from a few years ago and much higher than in other major metro jail systems. As the New York Times notes, the cost is 42% higher than 7 years ago and more than twice the amount spent per inmate by correction departments in other large cities like Chicago and Los Angeles. Those cities have larger jail populations, but significantly lower cost per inmate housed. New York spends far more on its jail than other large American cities, even those with much larger inmate populations. Los Angeles, for instance, has an inmate population of nearly 19,000, about 7,000 more than New York. But taxpayers there spend only $44,965 per year per inmate, nearly half what New Yorkers spend, according to the report. But the skyrocketing costs have resulted in, or rather, they have not resulted in a more peaceful prison system. In fact, the city's jail has become even uglier, even as spending has ramped up. During the fiscal year that ended in June, the Times says there was a 124% increase in assaults on the staff by inmates at city jails and triple the number of allegations of use of physical force by guards. The violence at Rikers is horrible, and the city has tried to hide it from public view. A July report from the New York Times is chilling. The New York Times found that over an 11-month period last year, 129 inmates suffered serious injuries, ones beyond the capacity of doctors at the jail's clinic to treat, in altercations with corrections department staff members. The report cataloged in exacting details the severity of injuries suffered by inmates, fractures, wounds requiring stitches, head injuries, and the like. The report was based on information that the city's health department refused to make public. Yes, you heard that right. The city's health department refused to make the information public, and the New York Times had to do a report, and somehow they were able to extract this information. Union representatives for prison guards have long argued that the solution is more guards, and it's true that the number of guards in the city's jail system has declined somewhat from about 9,200 in 2007 to 8,900 this year. But those guards are also tasked with guarding a declining prison population, and so the ratio of guards to prisoners has actually increased by 19%, according to the report. In other words, each guard now has fewer prisoners than ever to look after. But yet, the officials, or rather the union reps, are saying, we need more prison guards. But it makes no sense. You've got, what is it? The ratio of guards to prisoners has increased by 19% over the last, 7-8 years? So, no, the answer isn't more prison guards. The answer, there's a lot of things that could be the answer. And I would say that one of the answers is to stop recruiting former military to be prison guards. And I say this with both firsthand experience as a prison guard and also from somebody that has paid attention to the ever-increasing use of force in various entities of government. And a lot of it has to do with the recruitment of former military to do these other government jobs when they get back from the battlefield. So, for instance, you've got somebody that just came home from Iraq or Afghanistan, and they're no longer in the military. They're looking for work. What do? They go file for a job at either a prison somewhere or as a police officer somewhere. And because they haven't completely sort of detoxed from the war zone, they're still looking at people as the enemy. They're mentally, they are still in battle mode. And then you have other things to where just knowing that government employees, especially those that are put in positions of authority, such as prison guards, they're going to naturally increase the amount of violence. They're going to want to do something to get their adrenaline running again. So there's been reports of police officers saying that they would intentionally leave a suspect unhandcuffed, sitting on the side of the road while they were searching the car, hoping that the guy would get up to run away so that they could then get that adrenaline boost again and then go, tackle the guy or shoot the guy, something to get the adrenaline flowing. And I don't know exactly if that's happening in the New York City prison system, but I can take an educated guess and tell you it probably is. If you have not read the book Authoritarian Sociopathy by Davi Barker, I highly recommend that you do so. If you don't feel like reading the book, that's okay. It's available as an audiobook. You can find that on Audible, and I'm the one that narrated the book. So, yeah, I highly recommend you listen to that, and I'll post this link on the Facebooks and the Twitters. Stay tuned. We'll have more when we come back after the news. Hi, I'm Darryl W. Perry, and I need your help to take Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the road. In the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I intend to take the message of peace, love, and liberty on the road. I intend to leave New Hampshire at the conclusion of the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and return at the beginning of PorcFest. During the 104-day trip, I'll be visiting at least 10 cities across the country, speaking to people about the ideas of peace, love, and liberty, while continuing to produce daily Liberty media. Pensacola, Florida, Austin, Texas, Sedona, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado are already on the map. If you have a college group, a local Liberty on the Rocks, or other Liberty meetup that you'd like me to visit, you can possibly add your event to my calendar. To find out more about the tour or to donate, visit tour.fppradio.com. That's tour.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. James Comey doesn't want you to have encryption. He doesn't want you to even use encryption. And if I had to guess, you would probably have no clue who James Comey is. James Comey is the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The director, James Comey, last week warned in stark terms against the push by tech companies to encrypt smartphone data and operating systems, arguing that murder cases could be stalled, suspects could walk free, and justice could be thwarted by a locked phone or an encrypted hard drive. Yes, that's actually what he said. That's not me blowing smoke. The article here is from the Associated Press. Privacy advocates and tech experts called the concerns exaggerated and little more than recycled arguments the government has raised against encryption since the early 1990s. Likening encrypted data to a safe that cannot be cracked or a closet door that will not open. Comey said the move by tech companies to protect user communication in the name of privacy is certain to impede a wide range of criminal investigations. New legislation to allow law enforcement to intercept communications is needed at a time of advancing technology and new forms of communication, according to Comey. Comey was giving a talk at the Brookings Institute and said, "We have the legal authority to intercept and access communications from information pursuant to court orders, but we often lack the technical ability to do so." Comey then cited particular cases in which he said access to cell phone data aided in a criminal investigation. But in a question and answer session after the speech, he said he could not cite particular instances in which someone was rescued from danger or who would not have been in danger had law enforcement been blocked from that information. And after I finish this article, there's another article from the AP to where they actually did some investigation into the cases cited by Comey, where he says that us being able to get this information prevented these crimes or helped us solve these crimes. Well, maybe not, but I'll get to that in just a few minutes. Comey went on to say, logic tells me there are going to be cases like that, meaning cases where being able to steal data from someone's phone or, hack their cell phones or computers would be able to help them prevent a crime or rescue someone who was in imminent danger. But my guess is that if someone's in imminent danger and able to send out a text message to one of their friends, the friend is then going to call the cops. And you'll actually find out that maybe that's what happened in all of these cases where they said that being able to get data helped them solve crimes. The article here by the Associated Press continues. It says the speech comes after the announcement by Apple and Google that their new operating systems will be encrypted or protected by default with coding. law enforcement officials could still intercept conversations, but might not be able to access call data, contacts, photos, and emails stored on the phone. So basically, they'll be able to still get the metadata, which is what they have been doing with the NSA, and arguably the metadata gives you more information than if you were to be able to read someone's emails on their phone. And I say that because I remember reading a study several months ago, probably a year ago now, where there was a college professor, I think out at Stanford or UCLA or Cal Berkeley, well, one of the colleges out in California, where the professor found people to volunteer to let him get their metadata from their cell phone and landline if they still had one. I don't know anybody that still really has a landline for anything other than business purposes. I take that back. My grandmother in Montana still has a landline because, that's pretty much the only phone that Grandma is probably going to use. I am not sure if she actually owns a cell phone. So, yeah, there are very few people. So, take that for what it's worth. Basically, Grandma's the only person that has a landline not for business purpose that I know. So, look at that demographic and extrapolate from there. But anyway, this college professor was getting the metadata, and he was able to, and of course this was with permission of people who signed up allowing him to get the information, he was able to determine that one individual recently broke up with their significant other, someone else was pregnant and I think considering an abortion, because somehow he was able to determine that based on the time of calls made to one telephone number in particular, that it was a family member, and based on times of calls to another number that they were calling a hospital, and then there was another number that I think was a Planned Parenthood facility. But anyway, this guy, just by looking at the metadata of calls, the time, the date, the length, and the telephone number of what was being called, he was able to put all of this together and write up, like, you're this old, you do this, that, and here's what's been going on. And he was accurate. Like, some astronomical amount of the time, he was accurate. I wish that I could, recall the name of the study and pull up the specifics, but that's what can be found with just metadata. So I would argue that metadata is probably more revealing than are the contacts, the photos, and the emails on your phone. The article here continues. It says, while the company's actions are understandable, Comey said the place they are leading us is one we should not go without careful thought and debate. Comey acknowledged a rise in public mistrust of government in the year since the former National Security Agency systems analyst revealed NSA secret intelligence collection programs, but he said the public was wrong to think that law enforcement can access any and all communications with the flip of a switch. Comey also said that the FBI was committed to a front door approach through court orders and under strict oversight to intercept communications. Privacy advocates have long been concerned that interception would create an opening for hackers to exploit. And that's exactly what it's going to be. As the EFF rightly wrote in their brilliant response to the FBI, that if you somehow lead people to believe that only the quote-unquote good guys in law enforcement can enter the back door, then you're trying to fool people. Because anytime there's a back door, somebody's going to find their way into the back door. If you leave a spare key under the doormat of your front door, somebody's going to figure out it's there, just because so many people in years past would do just that. Like, oh yeah, there's the spare key here. And people have come to figure out where people hide their spare keys. So if you think that, only your next door neighbor that you trust a lot is going to, know where you keep your spare key, then you're fooling yourself, because criminals are always going to find the spare keys or find the secret back doors that only the good guys are supposed to know about. So James Comey is trying to set up a very dangerous place to where none of your privacy is secure. And in fact, I don't think he wants you to have any privacy. But that should be for you to determine, right? If you don't want privacy, then it should be up to you to post your Facebook username and password online. Post your credit card numbers online, because, nobody needs privacy, right? Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. So the Associated Press did some digging and found out that James Comey might have been a liar, pants on fire, when he said that encrypted data and locked smartphones might somehow wind up causing crime to not be solved. And he cited some instances to where he claims that being able to get people's cell phone data and stuff off of their computers actually solved crimes. But the Associated Press did some digging, and, well, apparently not all of the cases cited by the FBI hinged on access to data. The article says the text messages captured a cover-up of unimaginable abuse. Parents had struck their toddler so often that they ultimately killed her. The child shook badly because we beat her, the father wrote, and the mother complained that their 2-year-old was the devil. FBI Director James Comey says encrypting data stored on smartphone and computers could hurt criminal investigations, and evidence reviewed by the Associated Press shows that the child abuse case in Los Angeles from the summer of 2011 is a powerful, compelling argument. Prosecutors said the text recovered by investigators prompted the parents to practically beg for a plea deal. But at least 3 other examples the FBI director has cited are not so cut and dry. They are cases, and I hate when a web page does this, to where it does this auto-refresh thing when you're in the middle of reading something and it just auto-refreshes. So it came back here, thankfully. The article continues. It says at least 3 other examples the FBI director cited are not so cut and dry. They are cases in which the authorities were tipped off or even solved the crime through means other than examining data they took from victims or suspects. While digital evidence may have aided those investigations, authorities nonetheless relied upon evidence beyond what was stored on a cell phone to nab a criminal or to secure a conviction. The struggle to justify the FBI's complaints about new phone encryption underscores the uphill fight facing the Obama administration in the wake of the disclosures by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden. Those revelations showed the government was collecting phone records and digital communications of millions not suspected of any crime. It's not clear how the FBI hopes to untangle the encryption technology already rolled out to consumers, such as seeking new legislation on Capitol Hill restricting its use. Yes, you heard that right. There is a federal bill right now to make it to where you can't use encryption, or at least rather to greatly restrict your ability to use encryption on, I'm assuming, smartphones, computers, desktops, laptops, anything else that one could encrypt. I wonder if this would apply to those, if I get a secret decoder ring and then I write everything using the secret decoder ring, setting it to, like, today's secret letter is B. Today's secret number is 7. And because you remember, what was it? A Christmas Story, where Ralphie got the secret decoder ring that he had been waiting for, and he got the message after the end of the Little Orphan Annie show, and he's in the bathroom, and he's scribbling and jotting down and trying to decode, and his little brother needs to go potty, and he finds out that the secret message was, don't forget to drink your Ovaltine. So if I were to do that, use the secret decoder ring for all of my messages, would that fall under these regulations of restricted use of encryption? Because that's really what the secret decoder ring is it helps you encrypt stuff. Granted, it's really old technology for encrypting, but it's still encryption nonetheless. The article here from the AP continues. It says Congress is expected to return to Washington in November to consider the USA Freedom Act, legislation supposedly aimed at reining in the NSA's surveillance capabilities and providing more transparency to secret proceedings in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. The reason I say supposedly reining in the NSA is the USA Freedom Act has been watered down so much that groups like the EFF have since pulled their support of the bill. So that should tell you something right there, when the privacy groups had previously supported the bill and now they've pulled their support of the bill because it is so watered down. The article here continues. It says, the FBI chief on Thursday cited cases involving a sex-offending cab driver in Louisiana, an abusive mother in Los Angeles, a Kansas drug ring, and a reckless driver in California, saying each showed the value of law enforcement ability to read files on cell phones. Comey said, quote, encryption isn't just a technical feature, it's a marketing pitch. But it will have very serious consequences for law enforcement and national security agencies at every level. He echoed earlier comments after Apple and Google said they would encrypt their phones by default. The government's concern may be directed part towards the Apple iMessage platform, which offers end-to-end encrypted text messages, unlike traditional SMS. The encryption likely means the only way for police to read those messages is by obtaining a user's iPhone. Apple has sold hundreds of millions of devices that use iMessage. Most examples, writes the AP, the FBI director cited, showed that evidence extracted from phones was at best supplementary. Comey pointed to a hit-and-run driver in Sacramento, California, who was convicted of second-degree murder in a 2012 collision that killed a man and 4 dogs, saying, quote, GPS data placed the driver at the scene of the accident and revealed that he fled California shortly thereafter. Defense lawyer Michael Long, however, recalled that a side mirror found at the scene of the crime, taken as evidence to a car dealership, was the initial clue that led investigators to identify the type of vehicle involved. More breaks came with tips from eyewitness accounts and anonymous tips that placed Paul William Walden at the collision scene. Walden was arrested coming out of his driveway and admitted being present at the collision, a damning admission presented to the jury. With access to his phone, Long said investigators subpoenaed records from the cell phone service provider and used cell tower location data to place him near the scene, records that police can routinely obtain if they don't physically possess the person's phone. So the claim is, we got this information because we had the phone, and if we didn't, or if it was encrypted, we couldn't. But this is stuff that they could have gotten without the phone. All they need to do is call the phone company and say, yeah, we've got a warrant. Give us the info. There's more when we come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. online at fppradio.com. I'll get back to the article from the Associated Press where they pretty much break down the claims by FBI Director James Comey and say, no, James, stop lying to us. You're telling us that, you guys need to be able to crack into people's cell phones to solve these crimes. You gave us 4 examples. 3 of them are pretty much BS, and they're going through the 3 right now. So I'll get back to the first one, which was a hit and run that the FBI says they couldn't have solved without being able to have the cell phone. The Associated Press is saying, not so fast. You got all the information you needed without the cell phone. But I'll get back to that after I tell you about Roberts and Roberts Brokerage. Since 1977, Roberts and Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling your investment-grade precious metals. They now take Bitcoin for purchasing precious metals so that you can turn some of your profits into a long-term, stable investment. Call Roberts and Roberts Brokerage for knowledgeable advice on investing. That's 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. So let me pick back up where I was. It says, with access to his phone, the district attorney said that investigators subpoenaed records from the cell phone service provider and used cell tower location data to place him near the scene. Those records, however, could and routinely are be obtained even if they don't physically possess the phone. The DA said they wouldn't have had his cell phone until they had Paul. The cell phone technology, Paul being the suspect here, the cell phone technology was very helpful for them once they had Paul and they had his phone and his records to be able to piece together his trail across the country. It helped them convict, but it did not help them capture Paul Walden is serving a sentence of 25 years to life. Another case involved a heroin trafficking organization in Kansas City, Kansas, whose drug dealing resulted in multiple drug overdoses. Court filings show that while the suspects arranged orders using phones, they discarded every few weeks. Investigators constructed their prosecution around the months of undercover drug purchases involving confidential informants, a decade-old, more conventional law enforcement strategy. Brandon Bell, a lawyer for Verdell Handy of Kansas City, who was convicted of attempted murder of a witness and multiple drug-dealing crimes, said he did not recall electronic evidence factoring into the prosecution of his client. Bell said the government's evidence was a number of people who allegedly purchased narcotics from Mr. Handy and an eyewitness account of someone Mr. Handy attempted to murder. I believe they followed a traditional investigative model, identifying lower-level distributors and getting their cooperation to identify and supply evidence against the suppliers above that. A fourth case was involving a 12-year-old boy killed by a sex-offending taxi driver who posed online as a young girl and sent the boy text messages. Comey said the phone of the suspect and the victim were instrumental in showing that the suspect enticed the child into his taxi. But according to authorities, they first zeroed in on the suspect after finding his cab parked suspiciously on a highway shoulder and determining through a license plate check that he was a registered sex offender. Physical evidence also connected the two after the driver was arrested, though authorities have said the electronic evidence did wind up being important for conviction. In response to concerns Comey expressed earlier about phone encryption, the Associated Press asked the Justice Department more than 2 weeks ago about specific cases in which encryption might have hindered law enforcement. The FBI ultimately said Comey's speech this week was intended to provide those examples. Police say there is sometimes great evidentiary value in text messages, particularly involving gang-related homicides, where eyewitnesses are nearly non-existent and assailants brag about their misdeeds. In the Los Angeles case, for instance, text showed a pattern of abuse and cover-up among the girl's parents, even as their daughter was on life support. They know those text messages could not have been put in front of a jury, said Los Angeles Sheriff Sergeant Richard Biddle, who investigated the case. It showed how callous they were. They didn't care about the kid. They only cared about themselves. So, from the information given by the FBI, where they cited 4 cases, saying, here's 4 cases where we had to have data from cell phones and computers, and had there been encryption or even, like, if they would have had a pattern to where you have to crack a pattern to open the phone, then we never would have been able to get this info and convict these people. Only one of them really had anything to do with data being collected from the cell phones. And in that case, the people were practically pleading or begging for a plea deal. The other cases were all solved in other ways, and then the cell phone data was then used as evidence to help bring about the conviction, but not the capture of the person. So it seems as though, the FBI is really trying to fearmonger and say, no, encryption's bad, see? And I think a lot of people are going to wind up buying it. A lot of people are going to wind up, because a lot of people just love the cops and they don't want to do anything that's going to wind up making the cops' job worse, right? Because, why should I make the cops' job harder? They go out there every day and kill people's dogs. I should just, give them all of my data. And to those people, I will repeat what I have said on other occasions. If you honestly believe the line of, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, then please put your usernames and passwords for every website you use online. Post it. Just put it out there. Because after all, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? So just go ahead, put all of your info out there. Put your credit card numbers out there, including the expiration date and the CCV number, as well as your home address, the billing address for the cards. Because, after all, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Put out, your Social Security number, your bank account login information for where you log into your online bank account. Put that stuff. Put every username and password that you have online. Put your routing number for your bank. Put your check account number. Put all of it online. Better yet, get a billboard. Rent a billboard and put all of your information on a billboard. Because, after all, right, you're the ones that are saying if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Why should you encrypt stuff? Because that's just going to make the cops' job harder. You shouldn't do that. No. If you believe that, if you honestly believe that the only people using encryption are criminals, then please put all of your information online. Post it for the world to see, and then you'll learn how quickly privacy matters. I guarantee you, nobody's going to take me up on this challenge because they know that it is complete insanity. It is lunacy to think that you can just put every piece of information about yourself online and that the bad guys won't find it. That is why encryption is important. It's to protect yourself from the bad guys. And sometimes you might wind up keeping the good guys out as well. But hey, it's your privacy. You should be in charge of your privacy. You shouldn't let other people be in charge of your privacy. Don't let other people scare you into not protecting your data. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. There's more when we come back. I have the response from the EFF to FBI Director James Comey when we come back. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. I have calmed down a little bit. And I have an article here from the EFF. It is the response by the Electronic Frontier Foundation to FBI Director James Comey, who I gave you some of the snippets earlier, as well as the Associated Press. I guess criticism, or rather their investigation into some of the statements that were made by James Comey. And it turns out that, yeah, he's pretty much a lying you-know-what. So the article here from the EFF says FBI Director James Comey gave a speech reiterating the FBI's nearly 20-year-old talking points about why it wants to reduce the security in your devices rather than help you increase it. Here is EFF's response. The FBI should not be in the business of trying to convince companies to offer less security to their customers. It should be doing just the opposite. But that's what Comey is proposing, undoing a clear legal protection we fought hard for in the 1990s. The law specifically ensures that a company is not required to essentially become an agent of the FBI rather than serving your security and privacy interest. Congress rightly decided that companies and free and open source projects and anyone else building our tools should be allowed to provide us with the tools to lock our digital information up just as strongly as we can lock up our physical goods. That's what Comey wants to undo. It's telling that his remarks echo so closely the arguments of that era. Compare them, for example, with the comments from former FBI Director Louis Freeh in May 1995, nearly 20 years ago. Quote, "We're in favor of strong encryption, robust encryption. The country needs it. Industry needs it. We just want to make sure that we have a trap door and key under some judge's authority where we can get there if somebody is planning a crime." Actual quote from former FBI Director Louis Freeh in May of 1995. He says right there, like, we need a trap. You can have all the encryption you want as long as we have a master key that lets us get in, and then nothing's really encrypted. So the article here continued, or actually the response from the EFF continues. It says, now, just as then, the FBI is trying to convince the world that some fantasy version of security is possible where good guys can have a back door or extra key to your home, but bad guys could never use it. Anyone with even a rudimentary understanding of security can tell you that's just not true. So the debate Comey calls for is phony, and we suspect he knows it. Instead, Comey wants everybody to have weak security so that when the FBI decides somebody is a bad guy, it has no problem collecting everyone's personal data. That is bad science, it's bad law, it's bad for companies serving a global marketplace that may not think the FBI is always a good guy, and it's bad for every person who wants to make sure that their data is as protected as possible, whether from ordinary criminals hacking into their email provider, rogue governments tracking them for politically organizing, or competing companies looking for trade secrets. Perhaps Comey's speech is saber-rattling. Maybe it's an attempt to persuade the American people that we've undertaken significant reforms in light of the Snowden revelations. The U.S. government has not, by the way, and that it's time for the pendulum to swing back. Or maybe by putting the issue in play, the FBI may hope to draw our eyes away from, say, its attempt to water down the national security letter reform that Congress is considering. It's really difficult to tell. But the FBI gets its way, or rather, if the FBI gets its way and convinces Congress to change the law, or even if it convinces companies like Apple to make our tools and hold our data to weaken the security they offer to us, we all end up less secure and enjoying less privacy. Or, as the Fourth Amendment puts it, we'll all be less secure in our papers and effects. And then they have a link. It says, for more on EFF's coverage of the new crypto wars, read an article focusing on the security issues we wrote about last week in Vice. And then they also link to a broader update to something that was written in 2010 about 9 epic failures of regulating cryptography. And I actually think that in these closing moments, I will pull that up and read some of the highlights. But it's important to note here, let me just repeat one of the things that the EFF wrote here. It says, the FBI is trying to convince the world that some fantasy version of security is possible, where good guys can have a backdoor or extra key to your home, but bad guys could never use it. And that's really what it is. And that's what I was alluding to earlier of if your security is to put the spare key under your front doormat, thinking that only your neighbor would know to look there, and your neighbor would only look there because you told the neighbor, hey, if anything happens, here's where the spare key is, and you somehow assume that criminals would not ever think to look up under a doormat, then you are fooling yourselves, and you're believing the lie that, only the good guys will ever use this, and they would only use it for good. No. Backdoors in cryptography, it's kind of like the Force. And I'm not a Star Wars guy, so forgive me if I totally screw up this reference here. But with the Force, there's the good and the bad. So, you've got Yoda who's telling Luke Skywalker, use the Force. And I keep wanting to do the Mel Brooks voice from the movie Spaceballs with Lone Star. Use the Schwartz, Lone Star. Use the Schwartz. So, there's the good side, using the Force or using the back door or the Schwartz or whatever you want to call it. And then there's the bad guys. There's Darth Vader. There's Dark Helmet. There's James Comey. There's the NSA. There's all of these criminal entities that mean you harm, that they also know the back door's there, and they also know how to get into the back door. They know how to get your data, and they know how to compromise your security. And I'm not saying all of this because I think that the FBI is always horrible. I would say the vast majority of the time they are probably not being the good guys. But there have been cases, and we know about these thanks to Freedom of Information requests, where the FBI and the NSA have gone after journalists for doing their jobs. There was the situation a couple of years ago where the NSA got the phone records from the Associated Press for 2 months. Every telephone line going into and out of the Associated Press offices, those records were all obtained by the NSA because one reporter was doing a story about Al-Qaeda, and one reporter had a contact that was part of one of these Al-Qaeda affiliates in the Middle East, doing legitimate reporting. But the NSA and the FBI, they say, oh, somebody's contacting somebody that's a suspected terrorist. Everybody in this organization must be bad and must be suspected terrorists. No, they're journalists. They're doing their job. Leave them alone. There's no telling how much information the NSA wound up receiving from 2 months of phone records, including cell phone records for reporters at the Associated Press. So, real quick, the 9 epic failures of regulating cryptography. It will create security risk. It will not stop the bad guys. It will harm innovation. It will harm U.S. business. It will harm consumers. It will be unconstitutional. It will be a huge outlay of tax dollars. The government hasn't shown that encryption is a problem, and mobile devices are just catching up with laptops and other devices. And, of course, that's the bullet points from the article. I will post it on the Facebooks and the Twitters, and you can read that article for yourselves in your spare time. And in the meantime, catch all of the archives, fppradio.com. And don't forget, there's the daily 5-minute newscast. Only takes 5 minutes to listen to. Subscribe, fppradio.com. I'll see you next week.